that fans they're voting with their money, their pocketbooks right now, that they're not entertained by this brand of basketball. Sophie Cunningham, guys, she was the light of our life tonight. She went absolutely berserk, particularly in the fourth quarter. I do want to bring this up. When Brittany Sykes got hurt,
something is happening in the WNBA right now, and the people who spent months predicting it would never happen are suddenly very, very quiet. The Indiana Fever are winning. Caitlin Clark is dominating, and the entire landscape of the league is shifting in real time, right in front of everyone who said it couldn't be done. But here's what nobody is talking about. The story behind the wins is actually more complicated, more surprising, and more revealing than the scoreboard suggests. Because this isn't just a feel-good turnaround story. There are tension points, controversial decisions, officiating controversies, and a rotation debate that has fans absolutely divided. And underneath all of it is one central question that nobody has answered yet. How far can this team actually go? If you've been following this team even loosely, you already know something is different. The energy is different. The confidence is different. And the critics who were writing this franchise off just weeks ago, they've gone noticeably silent. Before we get into all of it, if you're new here, drop a like and subscribe right now. This channel covers the stories the mainstream sports world glosses over. You'll want to be here for what's coming. Let's start from the beginning.
Caitlin Clark has that basketball in her hand, the best player in the league, the best point guard in the league, hands down. It ain't close. It ain't nothing to talk about. Caitlin Clark with another double-double, 21 points, 14 assists, as she did her part to secure a victory for the Indiana Fever. She also contributed 5 rebounds, but the shooting was awful. And I'm going to be real, Caitlin, mama, I need you to make shots. I need you to make shots. Caitlin Clark didn't hit her first 3 until late in the fourth quarter. She was 1 of 8 from 3, 5 of 15 from the floor. Okay, off shooting nights happen. She shot nearly 50% last week, nearly 40% from 3, while she became player of the week. But hey, man, we got high expectations. I need CeCe to make shots. But this was still a quality game. We're going to get into the...
For months, and it genuinely felt like months, the dominant narrative around Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever was built almost entirely on doubt. You couldn't scroll through sports media without running into some version of the same argument. That her game was too reliant on range. That her pace didn't translate. That the WNBA was a different beast, a more physical league. A league where the adjustments required were too significant for a rookie to make mid-season. Critics were everywhere, and they were loud. Every single time something went wrong, a missed shot, a slow quarter, a loss, it became immediate ammunition. The narrative machine never took a day off. And what made it worse was the way some of those takes were framed, not as standard sports analysis, but as something that felt deliberately designed to establish a ceiling on a player who hadn't even fully hit her stride yet. Fans pushed back hard, but pushback only adds fuel to that kind of debate. The cycle became almost predictable. Clark has a rough game. Critics pile on, supporters defend, the whole thing explodes across social media for 48 hours, and then it resets. Every week, without fail. What finally broke this cycle wasn't an argument. It wasn't a hot take. It was a performance. When Caitlin Clark went out and dropped 21 points and 14 assists in a Fever victory, something changed, and you could feel it even through a screen. 21 and 14. Think about what that actually means. 14 assists in a single game is the kind of number that makes opposing coaching staffs lose sleep. It means you are operating as the engine of an offense that simply does not function the same way without you. It means every single player on your team is better because of your presence on the floor. It means the ball is moving, defenses are collapsing, and gaps are opening up in ways that wouldn't exist otherwise. The league took notice. Player of the Week honors followed, and the timing of that recognition landed like a statement. Now, to be completely fair, and this is important, the shooting was not there that night. 1 for 8 from three-point range is genuinely rough. 5 for 15 from the floor isn't what anyone wanted to see. And those missed free throws, 4 of them. That cannot become a habit. Full stop.
She ended the game the other day shooting the lights out from 3. She shot the lights out from 3 in this game. And this is how last year started. When Sophie Cunningham went on about a 6-week tear that absolutely contributed to this team somehow, some way making the playoffs last year. It was Sophie Cunningham. If you go back and look at her three-point shooting last year for about 6 weeks, she went bananas. Well, it looks like we're starting that all over again. By the way, let's just keep it real. I brought it up during this game. I posted it early on. Until Sophie went absolutely bananas with three-pointers tonight, this crowd was dead. This crowd was not fired up in the least bit. Here we go.
But here's the thing about elite basketball IQ. It shows up even when the shot isn't falling. Clark orchestrated a win on a night when her jumper was off. She found teammates, controlled tempo, and kept the offense breathing. That is not a small thing. That is actually a massive thing. The conversation shifted because what happened on that court wasn't just another stat line. It was evidence. Evidence that the version of Caitlin Clark and the version of the Indiana Fever that people have been waiting for was beginning to arrive. And what arrived with her was someone nobody saw coming. If you weren't watching Sophie Cunningham closely before this stretch, you are now. And if you were, you already knew this was coming because she's done this before. Go back and look at the tape from last season, specifically about a 6-week window where Cunningham went on a three-point shooting tear that defied all logic and directly contributed to the Fever sneaking into the playoffs. That stretch was electric. She was unconscious from behind the arc, and it almost felt like a fluke, a hot streak that happened at the right time. Well, it's happening again. In a recent outing, Sophie Cunningham came off the bench and proceeded to be, without exaggeration, the most efficient offensive player on the floor.
She didn't miss her first shot until like damn near fourth quarter. Sophie Cunningham was on fire. Defense on point, making every three damn near. Sophie Cunningham is definitely providing that spark, and that punch off the bench offensively that the Indiana Fever need. Because let's be real, Raven Johnson can't score off the bench. Myisha Hines-Allen isn't a scorer off the bench. Michaela Timpson can't score off the bench. We don't have no bench scoring. So it's like if Sophie Cunningham does not score for us off the bench, we're not getting points off the bench, guys. That's just the reality of the situation with this Indiana Fever roster. Now, Myisha Hines-Allen went out. She got hit in the face. Blood was everywhere. I thought the refs was absolute garbage. They was dog crap in this game. Myisha Hines-Allen gets hit in the face. Blood everywhere. No whistle. Caitlin Clark getting hit. First 3 drives of the game. No fouls. No.
8 for 11 from the field. 6 for 7 from three-point range. 2 for 2 at the free throw line. 24 points in 24 minutes. She didn't miss her first shot until the game was nearly over. Let that sink in for a second. 6 for 7 from 3 is not a hot streak stat. That is a locked-in, unconscious, every release looks exactly the same performance that only happens when a player is truly in a zone that's almost impossible to manufacture or predict. The crowd, which had been noticeably flat earlier in the game, came alive. The energy completely shifted. And Cunningham didn't just score. Her defense was locked in. Her movement was decisive, and her reads off Clark's drives were precise. Here's where things get uncomfortable, though, because Cunningham's performances are raising a question that some people are not ready to have. The bench rotation, as currently constructed, means Sophie shares minutes with players who, despite their best efforts, are simply not capable of providing offensive production off the bench at this level.
Can we have an uncomfortable conversation about the fact that it's time for Sophie to start over Lexi Hull? There, I said it. I said it out loud. I don't know if I'm supposed to say it, but I said it. Sophie Cunningham. Let's check it. Let's check it right here. Caitlin out to Sophie. One side step. Boom. Knocked it down. Beautiful. And she would just keep knocking them down. Let's go.
On the layup. Fever with
Caitlin again to Sophie. Boom. Knocked it down again. Sophie was on a tear, and she showed it right here.
Raven Johnson can't consistently score in that role. Myisha Hines-Allen isn't built as a bench scorer. Others in the rotation aren't generating points either. What that means in plain terms is this. If Sophie Cunningham doesn't score, the Indiana Fever's bench doesn't score. That is it. That is the entire equation. And that equation is leading fans to ask a very real question about the starting lineup. Let's just say what people are already saying out loud, because it needs to be addressed. Should Sophie Cunningham be starting over Lexi Hall right now? It's a loaded question because Lexi Hall has done things for this team. She's a hard worker, she brings physicality, and she's a reliable presence in certain situations. But the numbers don't lie. And right now, the numbers are pointing firmly in Cunningham's direction. When Sophie is on the floor, the offense is life. Defenses have to respect her range, which opens up driving lanes for Clark, creates catch-and-shoot opportunities for others, and generally makes the Fever a more dynamic, harder-to-guard team. The argument for keeping her on the bench is that she provides an instant spark, a luxury that a lot of teams would kill for. But the counter-argument is that if your spark is this good, why would you limit her minutes artificially by keeping her in a bench role? This is a debate that's going to intensify. And the way the coaching staff handles it will say a lot about whether this team is truly thinking about a deep playoff run or just trying to string together wins in the regular season. Because the talent is clearly there. The question is whether the roster construction and rotation decisions are going to keep pace with what's actually working on the floor. But before that question gets answered, there's another one that's been sitting in the room, and it has nothing to do with rotations. Here is something that should be making Fever fans genuinely nervous beneath all the excitement about wins and hot shooting. This team is missing layups at a rate that, at some point, is going to cost them in a game that actually matters. And let's be specific here. During a game where Caitlin Clark finished with 14 assists, there is an argument, a very credible argument, that she could have been looking at 20 assists if her teammates had simply converted at the rim. Aaliyah Boston, Lexi Hall, Sophie Cunningham herself. Multiple players had layup opportunities that they sent wide or simply didn't finish cleanly. It happened over and over again in a way that was impossible to ignore. Now, some nights that doesn't matter. If you're winning by 15 and the other team is shooting cold, those missed layups get absorbed by everything else working in your favor. But run that mistake pattern in a playoff game against a defense that's actively scheming to take away Clark's assists, and those misses become the entire story. The passing is elite. Clark is finding people in perfect positions, but finishing at the rim is a separate skill, and right now, the finishing on this team is inconsistent in a way that has to be addressed. This is not a crisis. It's a correction that needs to happen before the calendar turns to the most important games of the season. And speaking of things that need to be addressed, let's talk about the refs. Because it would be dishonest to cover this team's recent wins without acknowledging how frustrated the fan base has become with the officiating. Myisha Hines Allen took a shot to the face during a recent game. Blood visible, the kind of contact that in almost every other context would result in an immediate whistle. Nothing. No call. The play continued. Caitlin Clark was driven into on 3 consecutive possessions in the opening minutes of the same game. 3 drives, 3 times she drew contact, 0 whistles, none. Now, officiating complaints are nothing new in basketball. Every team's fans think their team gets the short end of it at some point. But the specific pattern here is what has people frustrated beyond the typical noise. Because when you watch the footage, the missed calls aren't borderline situations. They're the kinds of fouls that get called consistently in the regular course of basketball game. The WNBA made public statements earlier in the season about improving the quality of officiating. Players were told more fouls would be called, standards would be higher. And by the metrics of what fans have been watching, that commitment has not been consistently applied. It matters because Clark's free throw numbers are directly tied to this. For missed free throws in a game hurts. But if you're only getting to the line because of late game situations rather than when the fouls are actually occurring early, you're playing with a stat line that doesn't fully reflect the on-court reality. This is a conversation the league needs to have publicly and soon, because the fan frustration around officiating is not just noise at this point. It's a genuine credibility issue. And while all of that is unfolding, the wins themselves are telling a story that's impossible to dismiss. Here's what the scoreboards are starting to show, and what they tell us about where this team might actually be headed. When Caitlin Clark has genuine offensive freedom, when a system around her is built to let her operate at the speed and with the creativity that made her a phenomenon before she entered this league, the Indiana Fever look like a different team entirely. Not a slightly improved team, a fundamentally transformed one. The pace changes. The spacing changes. The way opposing defenses have to commit attention changes. And what happens when defenses commit too much attention to Clark? Teammates get open. Sophie Cunningham gets open. Drives open up. The offense breathes in a way that it simply didn't when the spacing was wrong or the reads weren't clicking. This is the version of basketball that Clark supporters spent the entire early season arguing was possible and were loudly told was wishful thinking. The game where she had 21 points and 14 assists wasn't just a good night. It was a proof of concept, a demonstration that the system, when functioning correctly, produces results that are genuinely difficult to stop. The crowd that was flat in the first quarter of that game, they were on their feet in the fourth. That's not a coincidence. That's what winning basketball does to an arena. It creates energy that feeds the players, which feeds the performance, which feeds the crowd right back. And there's one more element to this story that might be the most important of all. The most unsettling thing for teams in the rest of this league is not what Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever are doing right now. It's what they haven't done yet, because this team, by most analytical measures, is still figuring things out. The chemistry is developing. The rotations are still being adjusted. The finishing at the rim, as we talked about, is still inconsistent. The shooting on certain nights dips in ways it won't dip once Clark gets deeper into a rhythm. In other words, if the Indiana Fever are winning games and looking dangerous right now, in this not fully optimized version of themselves, what does this team look like in 2 months when everything is clicking? That question is what's keeping opposing coaching staffs up late. Not today's version of the Fever. The version that's still being assembled. The version that looks a little better every single week. The version where the layups start falling. The free throws stay consistent. The bench rotation gets settled. And Clark's shooting percentage climbs back toward the elite numbers she posted during her Player of the Week stretch. That version of this team, if it materializes, is a serious problem for anyone in this league. And the critics who spent months saying the style wouldn't translate, the system wouldn't work, the WNBA would expose every weakness, they're not saying much right now. There's a reason for that. Here's the truth that this entire story points to, and it's worth sitting with for a moment. The Indiana Fever's recent stretch of winning isn't just about basketball results. It's about something larger that plays out in sports every so often. A moment where a narrative built over months collapses under the weight of what's actually happening on the court. Caitlin Clark was told, in 100 different ways, that certain parts of her game wouldn't translate, that certain aspects of her style were too ambitious for this level, that the criticism was valid and the adjustment period would be long and painful and maybe never fully resolved. And instead of that prediction coming true, something else happened. The offense started clicking. The team started winning. The crowd started believing. And now a player who was supposed to be struggling is putting up double-doubles, earning Player of the Week recognition, and operating as the clear, unquestioned engine of a franchise that is beginning to look like a genuine postseason threat. The layup problem needs fixing. The officiating needs to improve. The rotation debate needs to be resolved. These are real issues, not invented ones. But they exist inside a larger picture that looks increasingly bright. And the thing about momentum, real momentum, the kind that builds game by game and shifts an entire team's identity, is that once it arrives, it is genuinely very hard to stop. The Indiana Fever have momentum. Caitlin Clark has her stride. Sophie Cunningham has caught fire. The only question left is whether anyone in this league has figured out how to slow all three down at the same time. Because so far, nobody has. If this video gave you something new to think about, hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps more people find content like this. And if you want to be here for every update, every controversy, and every story this league produces going forward, subscribe before you leave. This is just getting started.